We're going to get started now, so thanks everyone for coming back from lunch promptly. As you can see from the schedule, this is the portion of the conference where we get to do a question and answer session with Larry Wall. For those of you who have made it to this point of the conference and don't know, Larry Wall is the author of many things. The Patch program, Perl in many incarnations, including Perl 5, still in active use. Author of many books, including Perl Programming, the Camel book that everyone knows well. Perl Cookbook as well.
No.
Are we co-author on that?
Not really.
No? You got credit for it.
I help with it.
All right, well there you go.
That's the way it is with all these
With
books.
all these
I
things,
help
yeah.
with it.
All right, fair enough. Also, some facts I did not know. Thank you, Wikipedia. The winner of the International Obfuscated C Code Contest. Twice. Yeah, that was prep for Perl, yeah. And also winner of the first Free Software Foundation award for the advancement of free software in 1998. So, excellent. And one other interesting tidbit that you read as you're preparing for this is he's known for his wit and sarcastic humor, which makes you feel good when you're going to be standing here asking questions. So as we get started, if you have a question for Larry, you can tweet it with the conference hashtag. So the Perl Conference TPC IP, and also is the mic still on? Is it the batteries in and out? Oh, there we go. And if you include Ask Larry on there, so if you tweet to those two hashtags, then we'll see the tweets and we can get the questions. All right.
You got Martians on there.
Yeah. So let's get started actually with some questions that we got through Twitter from some of the folks at the conference. When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, that varied. When I was 4, I said I wanted to be a missionary, but I had no idea what that meant. When I was older, after I got really good at violin, I thought I would probably be a professional musician. A couple of years ago, they asked me what would have done if I hadn't done Perl. And at the time I said, well, maybe I would be a professional golfer. That was just the gag answer. But I actually think that if I had not been there hadn't been computers, I probably would have ended up a conductor of a symphony orchestra.
Okay.
I like doing that. I like playing an orchestra, like an instrument.
So that's a good lead into one of the other questions we got. Who's your favorite musical composer and why?
Gustav Mahler.
Okay. Some Mahler fans?
Oh, yeah. I played in the Seattle Youth Symphony. I played Mahler's 5th and Mahler's 10th. We actually did twice. Mahler's 10th is famous because he actually never finished it except in short score, and it was finished by one of his acolytes, Derek Cook. But it's the reason I like Mahler is because he's kind of like same reason I like Tolkien. We're all people who like to put everything into our life's work. And, it shows with Tolkien, his book is big. Not big enough, but it's big. And every Mahler symphony, he tried to put the whole world into his symphony. And, some people, the minimalists in the world don't often.
All right, well, we'll move on then, so we don't end up in tears up here. Question about Patch. I think maybe not everybody knows the original author of that, and I find that very interesting because I think that was 85, I think. So
that's about right.
Sound about right?
Yeah.
And I find it interesting because the version control that we all use today, Git, is basically based on patch and diff, more or less. I mean, that's kind of what it's tracking for all the things that it does, right? And Perl baked in there. I'm kind of interested with the connection to Git. How do you feel as a designer of tools for people, including languages, about Git from just a usability standpoint? We had a talk earlier about Git anxiety.
Well, that's actually several different questions wrapped up in one.
You can take your pick.
Yeah, well, the user interface kind of grew over time. and the commands are kind of random, and how you use the switches. I think fundamentally though, the problem that people have with Git is that they don't really understand that the model underneath is actually kind of a functional programming model where all the data is immutable, and everything is done as a reference to something prior. And as soon as you figure that out, then it becomes much easier to actually figure out what Git is trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I agree with that. I think that's probably, to me, I guess that's one of the hard parts about Git, though, is you do need to invest in getting that model. You can't really effectively use it and never understand.
Yeah,
that,
if you come at it from RCS, CVS, or SS, all those S's, it can be a little confusing at the beginning.
Are you aware of, or do you think that can you think of a candidate that might replace it? I know SVN was just, everybody used it for the longest time, and everybody just thought, wow, this is great, we're done. And then it seems so fast that Git just, like SVN was just gone. Do you see another iteration?
I don't see another iteration unless somebody can figure out a different level of interface that goes on top of something, and then it might get replaced as a back end. But or some company does something huge that just uses something different. I mean, we used what was it, ClearCase?
Yep.
And that's an interesting story, because that was based on the translucent file system, which was really a cool thing. And it turned out that the ClearCase people actually used Perl inside. They had to do their translucent file system. They wrote their file system handler in C, and they said when they rewrote it in Perl, it ran 8 times faster. So I think they were not writing very good C.
Yeah, right. All right, so let's move on. I actually have a question a little bit about JavaScript. So I think, and again, I'm a high-level JavaScript user, but I've always been kind of interested. So it kind of started off, and if you read some of the training books and things like that, it was a prototype-based language. But then, everyone was learning OO, so they kind of bolted on OO, and this sounds kind of familiar, maybe if there's another language that you program in. And then it's kind of an interesting thing. I had some friends who started writing in CoffeeScript, which was kind of layer on top of JavaScript, because it gave them better syntax that they liked, and then I think they started to fold some of that in. So I guess just from a language evolution perspective, how do you, how much do you follow JavaScript and for that path of evolving over time? I think it's made things challenging, and yet it seems to be one of the most accessible languages. That's what everyone says that they're learning first now. To me, I find that confusing that there's all these different models in there.
My main beef with the whole world of JavaScript is it's the model of the month. Now we use this library. No, now you got to use this library. Now you got to rewrite everything again.
CoffeeScript kind of fell into that a little bit.
With Perl 5, we made the opposite mistake, never breaking anything. With Perl 6, we made the opposite mistake and broke everything. But someday somebody's going to solve that problem, and I hope it's Perl 6, but we'll see.
So sticking with, sorry, but my mic seems to keep going in and out, doesn't it? So I'll just try to loud. So going with our retro theme, is there your YAPC 99 talk, 1999 talk?
Oh, yeah.
Is there a story about that?
Yeah, well, what was listed in the program, of course, was something about economics, the dismal art.
Yeah.
Well, or, that was a pun on, the dismal science. But I've been giving talks about how, Perl programming was an art, not a science. But, I felt like I can make shadow pictures up here of a camel and what were we talking about? Oh yes, the dismal
YAPC 99 talk.
right off my head.
Yep.
La 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 la. Check, 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 check. Slovak. Got to give them equal time. Slovak, 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 Slovak. Well, I'll let them figure that out.
Oh.
I could project. I decided instead to, I couldn't figure out anything to say about the dismal science that wasn't dismal. So instead, I decided to give the very first hardware talk. I had been playing with Perl in my house, and we have a dryer that goes, it's out in the garage, you can't hear it, so I made a sound that went whee, and the doorbell it goes ding dong, there's someone at the door, Grommet, and things like that. And this is all run with Perl scripts, of course. So I thought, well, I'll bring all this stuff in my X10 boxes and everything, and I brought them all on the airplane. And wouldn't you know it, for the first hardware talk that I ever wanted to give, turned out to be the last hardware talk I ever wanted to give, because the airline lost my luggage until after the talk. So it turned into a software talk. I got to show my programs and play the sounds, but I didn't get to actually demo it. So that, I guess that put me off doing hardware talks after that.
All right, excellent. With the retro thing.
That's my memory of 1999.
Having your luggage lost.
Yeah, my other memory of giving a talk up at CMU is a year or two after that, or maybe it was even the next year. Mm-hmm. I got a loose stitch. I had a cornea transplant some years before, and I had stitches, and they're just nylon stitches. They were, every now and then one of them would pop, and one popped just right before my talk. And so it's not life-threatening or anything, but it was scraping the inside of my eyelid. So I had this really, really thick tear jelly stuff I just loaded up my eye with. If I looked a little distracted that year, that's why. And immediately after the talk, they took me up to emergency and took the loose stitch out. But
wow, true pro. The show must go on, right? So. All right. So another topic, curious to hear your thoughts about, and we've been talking about it at the conference, how the way people learn programming languages is changing over time. We have different generations of people, and we have some young people here, which is fantastic at the conference. And I've kind of been asking, how did you start learning Perl? And if you go back, sort of back in the day, O'Reilly, when it first started, Tim O'Reilly had the idea to start printing some of the Unix manuals on, sort of dead tree stuff so people could have them. And he showed up at a conference and everyone was like, oh, that's great. It's, that makes it accessible for me. I get that. And of course, they evolved into having all the open source contributors, like many of the people, here at the conference and yourself, actually writing the books and starting to write books in different styles, like Learning Perl, which was much more accessible. It wasn't a man page. It was much more of a tour through the language. And as we fast forward, though, I'm curious, what your thoughts are as to what the future of, sort of people learning languages might be now that, many things, there's tools that are just so much more available. It's trivial to create like a screencast now or a video or something like that.
Well, there's still, 4 or 5 different learning styles that people have, and you need to hit all of them. But more and more, a lot of that need can be met online. There's some people who just have to have a teacher that they interact with, and tutorials are great for that. But I think most of the reference material that we put in, like people keep saying, well, you should write another programming Perl for Perl 6, and most of the information that would go into that, the reference information, you can find out online now. That wasn't the case when we started out. So I think to the extent that we continue publishing books and book-like things online, those will tend to move more in a philosophical, why did you do this, the rationale, more like the design and evolution of C++, like Strustrip did. I don't know. I might be going senile too fast to actually do that, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, I've tried to, I know, just for stuff that I do with RT and things like that, I've tried to start doing just screencasts of just doing things to get videos up, and, without even really promoting them, we're surprised at the number of views they get. And that's, and again, many people that I talked to here said, I asked them, how did you learn Perl? Like, oh, I watched a video, right? Which I think for many of us of a certain age, that's your first thing. It seems foreign, but, as you said, you have to kind of adapt.
It really depends on how accessible the information is right when you need it. The thing about starting, this kind of head-first approach is it works if you don't get discouraged partway through. All along, Perl has been designed, in every version, has been designed to be a language that you did not have to learn all of it at once. You could just learn the easy bits first and get something done, and then hopefully have the information available when you needed it to take the next step, and the underlying theoretical framework to carry you forward, even though you didn't know that you were doing something highfalutin underneath. We don't tell people to this day, with the beginners, we don't explain much about closures and lexical scoping and all this stuff. But when people are ready to learn that,
when they need it, it's there.
Then it's there.
Yeah.
And that all goes back to the linguistics. That's how we learn natural languages. We learn baby talk, and then we learn to talk like a 5-year-old, and then we learn to talk a little older. Then we learn to talk like a teenager, and it's all downhill from there.
Yeah, and you don't want to listen to any of that pretty much at that point. So we have a question that came in through Twitter. This is from, so there's an I in this, so I have to say that it came from David Hand. He says that once he sheepishly admitted to Larry that he'd chosen Java for the current project, and that your response was there's more than one way to do it. And his question is that this seems to be truly a general ethic and not merely, there's more than one way to do it in Perl, but truly there's more than one way to do it. Can you talk a little bit more about that ethic from a problem-solving perspective, not just you can do it in any language you want as long as it's Perl kind of thing?
Well, it doesn't matter what walk of life you're in. You have to be embedded in a culture to do it. But you always really have to look beyond that culture. In terms of anthropology, we have we have a village here, and there's other villages out there that have other ways of looking things. They speak slightly different languages or greatly different languages, and we have to contribute to the village. We also have to interact with those other villages in a useful way. So a lot of the whether you're programming or any kind of problem solving, they talk about thinking outside the box, but a great way to start learning to think outside of the box is just learning to think outside of your culture, your current culture. Even if you go to another culture and say, well, that's kind of cork-brained. Why are they thinking of it that way? There's reasons why they're thinking about it that way, even if they're bogus, and often just those kind of jogs will get you up to a meta level that's outside of any culture. And you see, well, all of our cultures are defective, but maybe there's some new culture we can synthesize on top of the strata of those old cultures that will be even better, and take the good parts. And that's the thing I like about the whole postmodern thing. There's a lot of bad about the postmodern culture, but we broke loose of this idea of there's just one way to do it. I've heard that slogan before, and sort of moved into different viewpoints are a healthy thing.
Yeah, and I think I've always appreciated with the Perl community too that there are the polyglots among us who go off and they actually participate in other communities, and then they bring back all the different ideas and the things that they do. And I always have found those talks are ones that I go to, just as you said, just to learn differently.
We need to listen to the storytellers from our tribe, but we also need to listen to the storytellers from the other tribes.
Okay, maybe a couple of quick ones. Hardest feature you added to Perl, someone asks.
Hardest feature I ever added to Perl. Oh, wow, that's well, it took a while to get the whole closures lexical thing to work, going from Perl 4 to Perl 5. I mean, that actually was a couple of years of work. For Perl 6, I think actually coming up with a parser that could parse itself and be completely extensible in any lexical scope was probably the hardest thing that I worked on there. But though mostly I didn't work on the actual implementations of these things. I think in terms of design, when we came up with we did the new, in the year 2000, and we said, well, what would we do if we could break backward compatibility? And I expected 20 RFCs, and we got 361. Dealing with that was hard. I mean, it set me on my heels for about 6 months before I even had a clue of how to start dealing with all that. And then just the idea of, well, kind of rank them in order of importance into different sections by which chapter in the Camel book they talked about, and that sort of gave me some sort of an ordering of importance. And then realizing that all these RFCs, even though they were just, the solutions they proposed were just completely bogus in the larger scheme of things, every one of them was a valid pain point. And I needed to just think about how we go about, cleaning some of that up in a global fashion. So that was the origin of Perl 6. Other than that, most of what I got in Perl, other people have done or I've stolen from elsewhere. You might think regular expressions are hard, but no, they were just based on Henry Spencer's regular expression package, and I just tweaked it and tweaked it and tweaked it and tweaked it. Yeah. It's my programming style, just change something, run it, change something, run it, change something, run it, and it shows in the design of Perl.
And it works pretty well. I do that too. So yeah. That's interesting. It makes me think of you kind of gone through for sort of a very large effort with Perl 5 where you were more involved in actual development and adding of features. But as you said, for Perl 6, much more in the designer role. When you were doing that design work on Perl 6, did you find yourself sort of slipping into thinking about implementation? I know this is something I think all programmers sort of face when you're trying to do a design phase of something. You're trying not to think about how you're going to write the code, but I don't know. I find it almost impossible. You start thinking, and all sort of the bad, pre-optimizing, and oh no, I can't do it that way. It'll be slow and things like that. Were you able to kind of just divorce yourself from that and just focus on what you wanted?
You don't want to divorce yourself entirely. There's a level on which that is true and a level on which it's false. You don't want to start coming pre-deciding this is how it's going to be done, but the question of whether something is implementable and whether something is optimizable, if there's prior art, or you can think of at least one way to do it, and the more ways you can think of doing something, the more likely you are to come up with the general solution that doesn't preclude whatever the right solution is. So all along, there's this old joke in computer science about, if we had a sufficiently smart compiler, it could deal with this. But that was kind of, one of our secondary design principles. Let's go ahead and assume that we will be able to have that sufficiently smart compiler someday. It was part of the, good, fast, cheap, pick two, and we had to do it cheap, because we're open source. So it's good or fast, pick ones, and we decided to pick good, and we knew it wasn't going to be, it was not going to be a fast process to get it done. Yeah. So when we realized that, we said, well, okay, the second system syndrome done right means you just take as long as you need to do to actually do everything you wanted to do. And so we said, okay, we will not get stuck in premature implementation in terms of the design, but it was always weighing very heavily. Is this implementable? Is there enough information, just in terms of information theory, enough type information to optimize this? Because we realized a lot of the difficulties with growing the design of Perl 5 were that the internals themselves were confused about what the types are. I mean, you use a string as a number. This was in an earlier talk. You use a string as a number, or as a number as a string, and Perl kind of forgets which one it is. Perl 5, and so that was the sort of level on which we said to ourselves, okay, let's make different mistakes this time. We can make it look type sloppy to the user, but let's not be type sloppy internally. And as a result, yeah, it did take a very long time, and we're still in the process of optimizing it. But and it's not perfect by any means, but it's getting useful.
All right. A few different questions around sort of future, looking forward, things like that. Maybe start off with one, sort of the path for Perl. And again, we've been talking about history a little bit at the conference. You start back when, 99 we're talking about, it was a lot of CGI, server side. Basically, you wrote your code on the server, dynamic web pages, things like that. Then we've kind of gone to cloud, which was interesting for Perl because I think a lot of people remember there was that phase of shared hosting where you often you couldn't get Perl on your shared host because in a lot of ways Perl was like too powerful. It gave you too much access to things on the system, which was interesting. So interested to hear your thoughts on that. And then also kind of the step that we see now, everyone's talking about serverless, right? Which is sort of just functions in the cloud, Lambda on AWS and things like that. And it's something that I've thought seemed like it would actually lend itself very well to Perl, where you could write these little snippets of logic that can then just run sort of on demand. So it, I guess I feel like Perl fits that curve pretty nicely. Like I said, except for that middle where the shared hosting folks never wanted to give Perl because it gave them too much access. But your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, yeah. I've been so busy doing the language design thing, I've kind of stayed out of the whole cloud thing. But yeah, the culture of that keeps changing. The basic underlying questions keep changing. I mean, it's always been the case that people have tried for locational transparency. Going back to NFS and before that, you run something and you sort of don't want to care whether it's running locally or somewhere else. It's always been the case that you always had this huge side effect.
Yeah.
If it's somewhere else, it's a lot slower.
Yeah, you had to really care.
And so you do care, and there's some level on which you always want to take Donald Knuth's rule that a really good programmer should know the entire stack all the way down, and what are the trade-offs at every level. You can't just always abstract things away. That being said, the granularity of abstractions keeps getting bigger. So, with NFS, it's just a disk seek, a disk operation. With then it became remote procedure calls, and then now it's all this container stuff, and you just throw a big thing in a container and throw it over the wall, and it goes. So, what happens after that? Containers of containers. The other thing that goes on all the time is this big pendulum keeps going back and forth over distributed versus remote. No, that's the same thing. Distributed versus central.
Yeah.
And that pendulum in the industry has swung back and forth, at least 3 times by now.
Yeah.
And it'll probably swing back again. Right now with all the cloud stuff, it's remote. But you go into Fry's and look at the disk shelf, and they have these disk drives that say cloud on your desk, So there's this forces coming to bring stuff back in as well. So, or maybe it's one of these damping pendula that eventually finds a happy medium in the middle. But there's always these swings back and forth. We've learned in Silicon Valley that it's a very cyclical business, and you can't really plan 5 years out. The buzzwords will be all different.
Yeah. Well, and then everyone who actually knows how this stuff works, probably most people in this room knows there's a disk running somewhere. It can be cloud, it can be serverless, whatever. There's a server somewhere that someone has to take care of. So.
I mean, there's a sense in which this whole services that the big folks provide, Google and Facebook and all the stuff where they're hiding their code behind a web interface is actually a kind of a reaction to the whole open source movement. It's a way of not sharing the source code. So maybe there's maybe that's another pendulum that's going to swing back the other way as the big companies get in trouble for being a little too big. Who knows?
Well, and interesting too, just to follow that thought, that how many applications now, even sort of commercial applications, even provide a version that you can run locally. I mean, everything that you can think of that most people run now is a cloud-hosted thing. Like you go to a website and you use it, and it's hosted. You know, all of the big things that you can think of now. The very few new things that come out have a version that you can run on premise, whether paid or not, paid or open source.
Yeah, and there's pressure to have both those things. You know, you got GitHub, but you can also run your own Git.
Sure. Yeah. But I don't think. Can you run your own Slack? Does anybody know? I don't think you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Open source. So open source. So still open source, maybe still keeping folks honest by chasing this stuff and saying it's not that hard. We'll do one. Yeah. So. Right. So a few other questions that we can get coming in from Twitter. Favorite Perl 5 and Perl 6 features?
My wife will tell you that I am terrible at coming up with examples. That's why I never was good at historical linguistics. Yeah.
Like as kids, right? You can't pick one?
Yeah, you're not supposed to.
Not supposed to do it, at least not publicly, and certainly not on video for the whole internet.
Yeah. Boy. As a linguist, my favorite thing about Perl 5 was actually that it is essentially a Creole language. Sort of started out as a pidgin language where it borrows from many different sources. So just the synthesis of taking different cultures in, like regular expressions and print formats and shell programming and all these things in awk and smushing them into a thing and actually making them mesh. That was the thing that made me happiest about Perls 1 through 5. With Perl 6, because we were trying to make different mistakes, we realized, we actually have the one-time opportunity to sort of create, instead of just borrowing culture from it, we can kind of fix all these bits, the horrible irregular expression syntax that we inherited from Unix, just the various ways in which other computer languages have kind of gone wrong. We have a one-time chance to kind of clean a lot of that up and to make something that is extensible into the future. And so just the way the everything inside the compiler is written in terms of this idea that there really is no one true language. You think Perl 6 is one language, but it's actually, there's the basic syntax, and as soon as you drop into a regular expression or a string, it's just dropping into a different compiler and then popping back out again at the end. So you never get these problems with that we get in Perl 5, where it interprets the string one way and then it goes back and reparses it. The whole source filter fiasco, the multiple passes that happen on regular expressions. This just never happens in Perl 6, and I think that's the thing I'm happiest about. That is that we were able to do that synthesis. It's not terribly useful right now, but I think it'll be terribly useful going into the future as people decide to extend it into different domain-specific areas.
Oh, for what it's worth, I think, at least from my experience, I think for people who learned Perl and maybe didn't come from a system administration background or didn't know sort of all the places where some of that stuff was stolen from, the cracks were papered over pretty well. It's all to many of those programmers who don't know all of that stuff, it looks like Perl to them.
Yeah,
so it was a decent rehab job.
It was an attempt to take this Unix culture, which do one thing and do it well, was the mantra, but nothing did one thing and nothing did it well. There were limitations all over the place. It was an attempt to actually do those things well and do them all in one place, so that you could write other tools that did one thing and do them well. So it was funny because the Bell Labs crowd sort of rejected Perl in the early days because it tried to do everything. But then it ended up kind of sneaking back into the toolbox and not just be a tool, but to be a tool shed, a machine shop for making other tools. And so that worked out well, yeah.
Sort of similar on the Perl 5, Perl 6. Biggest feature, if and when you're playing around in Perl 5 that you miss from Perl 6?
I don't know. I really kind of like both of them. They're just different. I guess what I really miss is the ability to write multi-methods, and it goes back to the type system underneath. You have to have a rigorous type system in order to do smart matching, right? Which is why it didn't really work out when it was backported. And you need the smart matching to do switch statements and multi-method dispatch. Not that my basic programming style uses that terribly often. I mean, you look at my Perl 6 programs; they look like kind of like Perl 5. Yeah. It's other people that make better use of Perl 6 features than I do. But it's always kind of been my skill set to kind of synthesize what other people need more than what just I need. Mm-hmm. I just have always had kind of a gut level feeling for what people will like, and even if it's not something that naturally occurs to my programming style, I like to enable multiple styles. Mm-hmm.
That's one of the nicest things about at least Perl 5. You can code any language in it. And often you can see that. You could tell when people come from other backgrounds. Yeah. You could look at their code and be like, "Oh, Java programmer, huh? Yeah. All right." All right. A couple maybe not quite so directly Perl-related questions. Most challenging non-technical issue you've ever dealt with, I guess, related to Perl, but non-technical?
Just keeping everyone from fighting. When people fight, I get post-traumatic stress, just for many historical reasons, some of which are completely outside of Perl culture. Mm-hmm. So that's hard on me. I really, really hate. I mean, it drives me nuts, almost literally, to see that, and so that's the hardest thing for me. Is I really stress out when I see people being mean to other people, or deciding the other people who are also trying their best are somehow evil. That just I have difficulty dealing with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and unfortunately, we're seeing that in a lot of areas outside of even.
Well, it's an ancient problem. Yeah, the Bible talks about in the end times the love of most will grow cold, and we see not much love in the world these days, on any level. And so I'll give you the message of the Apostle John: little children, love one another. Yeah. Amen.
So I have to imagine over the years you've been to tons of conferences, not just Perl and not just OSCON, but have you been invited to many other types of events just to come speak?
Yeah, they all have weird names like distractions and abstractions and curry on, and the weirdest thing I got invited to was that the functional programmers, the academic ones, have a once a year get together. It's just a kind of a colloquium of really smart people, and they invited me to be their non-functional programmer when we went to Iceland, and we were like 100 feet away from the mid-Atlantic rift. And, I laid awake all night saying, "Is it going to erupt? Is it going to erupt?" So that was a very but that was I presented some of the initial design of Perl 6 there, and they actually had some useful things to say about how to do functional programming underneath, and that helped some in the design. So, but yeah, there's lots of different conferences. I also to use Perl, I actually use Perl heavily. Our church has a teen quizzing, Bible quizzing thing, and I have written a lot of Perl programs in support of scorekeeping and scheduling for some of the conferences they have there, we do that every couple of years. They have their big conference, and
Are they on GitHub?
no.
Most memorable talk that you've gone to that you can remember or experience at a conference over the years?
Oh, well, all of Damien's talks sort of blur together.
Yeah.
It's like this. The picture of the guys being blasted by his loudspeakers.
Was
the way
that
I feel
Bose
mentally.
or Pioneer? Yeah, what was it? What were those commercials? What were the speakers? Anybody remember? Memorex? Was it Memorex? All right, yeah. Come on, don't you all have the internet in front of you? Can't you?
Well.
All right, 5 minutes. All right, well, very good. So we've got about 5 minutes left, so we'll get close to wrapping up. Common question that we've got here and some of the discussion that we've been having at the conference, which is great, because it was part of the reason for Sawyer bringing it up, was his talk about some of his ideas for where we're going. For the future. So he presented a few different things. As one I've mentioned already, thinking about the ways that we do documentation and training and getting people into the language, thinking about features, maybe tightening things up a little bit to make syntax less surprising, things like that. So from the keynote talk that Sawyer gave, thoughts on some of the things that he offered there.
Good luck. It's when you start breaking things, other things break. And we took the opposite approach of that Python did. Python just broke a few things and cleaned them up, and look how long it took them to. They're still trying to get people to switch from Python 2 to Python 3.
Yeah,
it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there are probably more things that can be deprecated, and certainly there are more things that can be borrowed back from the Perl 6 design if that's desirable. I was actually delighted that a lot of the things that have happened to Perl 5 over the last decade or so. They're ideas that also occurred to Perl 6, and I think is the right direction. Mm-hmm. That those things have been fixed. But if you're going to fix some fundamental things, then having a better type system that actually extends to the built-in types, that's tough. Mm-hmm. Perl 6 is one data point. There may be intermediate things that can be done, but it's hard. It's really, really hard. I hate slippery slope arguments because they're usually used to justify extreme positions. Mm-hmm. But this is one slippery slope. You start breaking things. You have to break. You end up having to break almost all the eggs to make the omelet. In my experience, but maybe that's just me.
One more thought that he had in his talk also was about sort of the relationship between the development of open source languages and corporate sponsorship, and he had some examples of. And it's interesting, actually. It's kind of nice in a way, I guess, from my perspective, that there are so many experiments, if you will, going on, because almost all of the languages do have a slightly different model in the way that they either are owned, sponsored, helped along by various companies that have decided to sort of invest in those. So any thoughts on either a particular company and or model and or language that you think is either doing it well or potentially goes into maybe a place that's not so good? And is there anything that you would suggest or see as like the best way for Perl to go if you could just make it happen?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I did not even predict the web. I mean, yeah, I made Perl a text processing language and a glue language because I just had this gut level feeling those would be needed in the future. But
to me, that sounds like you kind of predicted the web.
Yeah. Well, Tim O'Reilly once gave me a great compliment. He said, I don't understand what Larry Wall is doing with Perl 6, but he sees around corners, and I took that as a compliment. But in terms of corporate sponsorship, if you look at what's out there, you could not have predicted at any one point. I mean, you can't go out and get a corporate sponsor in that sense. Corporate sponsorship usually arises because somebody at a grassroots level started using something, and they just happened to be, the people who bootstrapped a new initiative. So, I mean, you would, when PHP started off, you would not have predicted that, that maybe the two biggest supporters of it would be IBM and Facebook. Mm-hmm. Similarly with Python, the fact that, Google sort of
just picked
it is almost an accident.
Yeah, they had a kind of had a votish type thing internally. I mean, I'm sure they were using every language under the sun, and they had to pick one, right? So, well, they said they had to pick one.
This is, you can't just, can't just will some of these things into existence. You have to go with the flow of history and wait for the next wave to come in, and hopefully recognize it. But you can't make the wave come in.
Yeah. So to the extent, though, if there's a wave, would your thought be that we should pick it? If there were people who, I mean, obviously we have great sponsorship for the conference and for Perl in general. But if someone had come along, how do you think that would help or hinder Perl, or it just would take it in a different direction and it doesn't have to have a value judgment?
It would have advantages and disadvantages both ways. Everything we do in life. We all pollute. We all have a big carbon footprint, probably more than we should. We all, take in perfectly good food and turn it into something else. We all, make our mess in the world. But hopefully, we all try to balance that out with trying to do some good. If we can see a great good. That doesn't have too much harm, well, that might be a trade-off worth taking. Sometimes great goods come with great harms. Sometimes you come out ahead. For me, I've always just been more of the other end of the spectrum, where I just try to do good where I am, and sometimes that's a big place, and sometimes that's a small place. I'm just as happy pulling weeds out of my garden, or running the sound and lights at my church. Or
I think Gene Hack needs some help with that.
Yeah.
Weeds. I think he actually.
Yeah, rocks.
Yeah, rocks, weeds.
Yeah.
He loves landscape fabric, though.
But
if anyone can run out to Lowe's, I think he would probably like a roll or two.
But just bloom where you're planted. Sometimes, but to recognize whether that's a window box or a much larger piece of dirt.
Well, I would most definitely put Perl on the good side of that ledger. And thank you for sitting up here and answering all of our questions. And thank you for Perl and all the work that you've done. So
you're welcome.
20 minutes.